I need you to understand something before I tell you what happened at that dinner. Because if you don't understand who I am, the ending won't make sense. And the ending is the part that matters. I am not the kind of woman who causes scenes. I don't slam doors. I don't send long texts at midnight full of accusations and rhetorical questions. I don't post vague captions for people to decode. When something hurts me, and I mean really hurts me, the kind of hurt that settles into your chest and stays quiet, I go still. I think. I process every angle until I can see the situation not as I wish it were, but as it actually is. And then, very calmly, I decide what to do. That stillness has been mistaken for weakness more times than I can count. It is not weakness. It is the most dangerous thing about me. His name was Daniel. We had been together for 14 months. 14 months of weekends spent in his apartment watching films we'd argue about afterward, of cooking dinner together of long drives where he'd play music I'd never heard and explain why each song mattered. And I'd listen, not because I always agreed, but because the way he talked about things he loved was one of the most attractive things about him. 14 months of him holding my hand across a restaurant table, of calling me on his lunch break for no reason, of saying more than once, quietly and without performance, that he had never felt this comfortable with another person in his life. I believed him. I had every reason to. Daniel was charming in that precise, calibrated way that certain men are not showy, not loud, but deeply fluent in the language of making people feel seen. He remembered details. He asked follow-up questions. He was the person at a party who found the one guest standing alone and brought them into the conversation without making it obvious that his friends loved him. The woman at the coffee shop downstairs from his building had his order ready before he reached the counter, and she always smiled when he walked in, and he always remembered to ask about her daughter's swim meets. He was, by almost any measure, a good man. I want to say that clearly, because this is not a story about a monster. It's a story about something quieter, and in some ways harder to name, the particular way that good people can make you feel invisible without ever raising their voice. He invited me to his company's quarterly dinner on a Tuesday night. We were on his couch, his arm around me, some documentary playing in the background that neither of us was really watching. He turned and said, "I want you there. I want them to meet you." I remember the weight of that sentence. I want them to meet you. It felt like a door opening. The dinner was at a restaurant that required reservations made weeks in advance. The kind of place with warm lighting and white tablecloths and menus with no prices, because the prices were not the point. His entire team would be there, his manager, Greg, senior clients, people who mattered to his professional life. I took it seriously. I bought a new dress, dark green, fitted, the kind that made me stand straighter when I looked in the mirror. I got my hair done Saturday morning. I was nervous in the way you are before, something that matters. Not the nervous of dread, but the nervous of awareness, of your body recognizing that a moment counts before your mind has fully caught up. He picked me up at 7. He told me I looked beautiful. He kissed me on the cheek before I got into the car, and the city looked golden through the window. And I thought, this is one of those nights. I had absolutely no idea how right I was. When we arrived, his manager Greg was already at the table. Late 50s, silver hair, the kind of firm handshake that communicates decades of practiced confidence. He looked at me with the polite, evaluating curiosity of a man who has attended hundreds of these dinners and knows that the people who show up alongside his team either matter or don't. Daniel smiled the smile I knew so well, relaxed and perfectly calibrated, and said, "Greg, this is my friend, Claire." The word landed so softly that I almost missed it. Almost. I smiled. I shook Greg's hand. I said it was wonderful to meet him. The conversation moved on, as conversations do, and I sat down and picked up my menu and held my face in exactly the right position. But inside, something had shifted with the precision and finality of a lock turning. Friend, not his girlfriend. Not the woman he had been with for over a year. Not even the vague but warmer someone special. Just friend. A word that cost him nothing. A word that told everyone at that table, anyone paying attention, exactly where I stood in his life when standing there had professional consequences. There's a moment, maybe you felt it, where the version of a situation you've been carrying in your head dissolves and is replaced, instantly and completely, by the actual version. No transition, no warning, just the sudden, cold clarity of the real thing. I felt it in that moment, clearly, without flinching, and before the first course had even arrived, I had already decided what I was going to do. The table had 12 people. I counted, without meaning to, the way you notice. Small things when part of your mind is occupied with something larger. 12 people? 3 couples, or people who appeared to be couples? 4 solo attendees. Greg, who was clearly comfortable running the room. Daniel, who was in his element, the way he always was in professional settings, effortless and warm and completely in control. And me, his friend. I want to be precise about what happened during that dinner, because the details matter. He wasn't cruel. He didn't ignore me in any visible, obvious way that someone could point to afterward. What he did was subtler and, because of that, more revealing. He kept me physically close while excluding me from his conversations. He touched my arm once, reaching past me for the breadbasket, and said sorry without quite looking at me. He laughed at something I said to Judith, the woman to my left, a client who worked in urban development and who I decided within 6 minutes was genuinely excellent, but didn't carry the thread forward. When Greg, in the natural course of dinner conversation, asked how Daniel and I had met, Daniel said, "Oh, through mutual friends," and pivoted immediately back to the deal they were working on. Not a lie, not quite the truth. Enough to answer without answering. Judith leaned toward me at one point, quietly, and said, "How long have you two been together?" Before I could respond, Daniel said, "We've known each other for a while." And then he turned to me with the full-wadded smile, the one that used to make something in my chest go loose, and said, "Right." I held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds. "Right," I said. Judith looked between us with the careful, knowing expression of a woman who has been around long enough to understand what people are not saying. She didn't press. She refilled my water glass instead, which felt like a small act of solidarity from someone who had no obligation to offer it. The food was extraordinary. Filet with a red wine reduction, roasted vegetables. Something with truffle that, under any other circumstances, I would have spent the rest of the week thinking about. I ate it carefully and complimented the restaurant to Judith, who agreed and told me about another place near the harbor that I should try. I took a mental note. I was present, engaged, warm, a perfectly pleasant dinner companion by every external measure. And I was also, beneath all of that, doing the math. I had looked up the restaurant before the evening the way I quietly prepare for things, the habit most people don't notice. I knew what these dinners cost. I had a reasonable estimate of what my portion would come to. And I had been sitting, for the last hour, with a question that had nothing to do with money. The question was about what the word friend had actually meant. Whether it was a slip, a simplification, a social calculation, or whether it was the most honest thing Daniel had said to me in months. I was going to find out. When dessert was cleared and the table moved into the slow, comfortable wind down that follows good food and good wine, I watched the way I had been watching all evening quietly, with complete attention, giving nothing away. The check came, a single check for the table, which Greg reached for with the easy confidence of someone who expected to. Daniel reached for his wallet. Standard, efficient. No one, in the natural course of reaching and sorting, reached for mine. Daniel glanced at me briefly, with the specific quality of a calculation, and then looked back at Greg. I reached into my bag. I took out my card. I caught the server's eye. "Could I get a separate check?" I said, "Just for my portion." The server nodded. Daniel looked at me. For the first time that evening, something moved across his face that wasn't fully controlled. Not alarm exactly. More like the flicker of a man who has just realized that the ground he was standing on is different from the ground he thought he was standing on. "You don't have to do that," he said, quietly. "I know," I said, and I gave him a smile, warm, easy, genuine. "I want to." My check came. I paid it. I put my card back in my bag and picked up my wine glass and turned to Judith to finish the conversation we had been having about the harbor restaurant. Daniel said nothing. The table continued its natural dispersal. Goodbyes were warm, handshakes firm. I hugged Judith at the door, and she pressed her card into my hand. "Lunch," she said, simply. I told her I'd love that, and I meant every word. Outside, Daniel's hand found the small of my back as we walked to the car. That automatic gesture of a man who had done it 100 times. I didn't lean into it. I didn't pull away. I simply walked. We drove 2 blocks before he said anything. "Good night," he said. Not a question. "It was," I said, and I meant it. The food had been exceptional. Judith was wonderful. The city had looked beautiful through the restaurant windows. A pause. Then, "You didn't have to pay for yourself?" "I know. I was going to cover it." I turned to look at him. He was watching the window with the expression he wore when a conversation was heading somewhere unplanned, slightly alert. Slightly careful, the calibration working just below the surface. "Were you?" I said. He didn't answer immediately, which was itself an answer. "Greg was handling the table," he said finally. "It would have been included." "Okay," I said, and I looked back out my window. "Are you upset? This is the moment I want you to understand. Because this is where it would have been easy and wrong to do the predictable thing. To say yes. To give him the argument he was prepared to manage. To be emotional in the way that lets people reframe the real issue as a tone problem, a sensitivity issue, something you somehow created by feeling it. I had made that mistake before, in a different chapter of my life, with a different person. I had watched the actual grievance dissolve into a conversation about how I was expressing it. I was not going to do that again. "No," I said. "I'm not upset." And I wasn't. That was the thing. I was the clearest I had been in months. He walked me to my door. He kissed me. He said he'd call tomorrow. I said okay. I went inside, took off the green dress, hung it carefully, made tea. I sat on my couch in the quiet of my own apartment, and I thought about everything with the unhurried attention it deserved. About 14 months. About the way his voice had shifted when Greg asked how we met, that practiced pivot, that almost truth. About the way I had felt standing at that table in that dress, holding a smile in place like a hand pressed against a door. I thought about all of it, and then I made a decision. Not an angry one. Not a wounded one. Just a clear one. The kind that comes when you finally stop arguing with what you already know. I picked up my phone and texted Judith. "Lunch this week?" Responded in 4 minutes. "Thursday. I know just the place." I smiled and put my phone down and finished my tea. Over the next 2 weeks, I stopped being as available as I had been. Not as a tactic, I want to be precise about this, but as a natural consequence of redirecting my attention toward my own life. I worked later. I went to the yoga class I had been canceling for months. I called Nadia, my closest friend, and we had the long, honest conversation we hadn't made time for since the previous spring. I had lunch with Judith on Thursday at a small, honest place with good sandwiches and excellent coffee, and she was exactly as remarkable as I had suspected. At one point, over coffee, she said, "I liked you immediately the other night." And then, after a pause, without ceremony, "He doesn't deserve you." I say that, having watched that dinner, I thanked her. She nodded, as though we had simply confirmed something factual, and refilled her cup. Daniel called on Wednesday. I let it ring and called back 2 hours later. He called again Friday. I answered. We talked for 11 minutes, normal, pleasant, surface level, and when he suggested dinner that weekend, I told him I was busy and we could figure out the following week. "Of course," he said. "No problem." His voice had a careful quality that told me he was trying to read me and finding it harder than usual. Good. Let him look. Because here is what he didn't know, what he couldn't see from where he was standing. It was no longer in the same conversation. He believed, because nothing visible had changed, that we were still operating under the same terms. He thought the dinner had been a small awkwardness, already receding. He had no idea that I had been quietly, methodically reordering my interior life, deciding what I was worth, deciding what I was willing to accept, and deciding, finally, what I needed to say. 2 weeks after the dinner, Daniel invited me to Marcus's birthday party. I said yes, and I wore the green dress. The party was at a bar Marcus had rented for the evening, warm and crowded in the good way, full of people who had known each other long enough to be easy together. Daniel's real friends, the people from his actual private life, not his professional world. In 14 months, I had met almost none of them. He introduced me to Rowan, who was loud and immediately funny, to Priya, who designed textiles and had a laugh you could hear from across the room, to Marcus himself, who pulled Daniel into a bear hug before either of them said a word and then turned to me with an open, genuine smile. And this time, Daniel introduced me differently. "This is Claire," he said to Rowan. "We've been together for a while now. Not girlfriend, but not friend either. Something in between. A hedge. An adjustment without an apology." I shook Rowan's hand and was warm and present and took note of every word. Later, near the window, Daniel found me talking with Priya about her work. He put his arm around me fully, without hesitation, the way he hadn't at the work dinner, and said to her, "She's the smartest person I know." Priya raised one eyebrow at me in a way that asked, "Is he always like this?" "He's in a good mood tonight," I said, and she laughed. But I held on to the contrast. Not with bitterness. There was no bitterness in me by then, only clarity. I was watching the distance between who he was when it cost him nothing to show me and who he was when it did. The party ended. We took a car to his place. He was warm and affectionate, the best version of himself. And for a brief moment, I felt the familiar pull of it, the ease of deciding the dinner had been a mistake. That this version was the real one. That real love allows for more grace than I was giving. I knew that pull. I had been living inside it for weeks. And I also knew that the version of someone that emerges when the stakes are low is not the whole truth. The whole truth lives in the moments when showing you costs something. When there's a room full of people who matter professionally and they have to choose, in real time, between what's convenient and what's right. He had made his choice. I had watched it, clearly and without distortion. Now I had to make mine. In the morning, while he made coffee, I sat at his kitchen table and said, "I need to talk to you about something." He brought the cups over. He sat down across from me. The morning light came in from the window behind him, and the apartment was quiet, and I thought, this is the truest conversation we have ever had. "The dinner?" I said. 2 weeks ago, Greg asked how we met, and you said through mutual friends. You introduced me as your friend. He started to speak. "I'm not angry," I said. "I need you to understand that I'm not hurt in the way that's asking you to fix something. I'm telling you what I saw. I paused. I paid my own bill that night because I decided I was only going to accept what I was actually being offered. And what I was being offered in that room was a seat at the table as a friend. So I paid my own way, like a friend would. He was quiet. I deserve more than that, I said. Not as a demand, just as a fact. He looked at his coffee. He looked out the window. When he looked back at me, the careful surface was gone, replaced by something more open and, I thought, genuinely ashamed. I know, he said. I know you know. I said. That's not enough. I stood up. I picked up my bag. I had no speech prepared. There was nothing more to say. The true thing had been said, clearly, without performance, without damage. I walked to the door. Claire, take care of yourself. Daniel, I said. And I left. The hallway. The elevator. The cool morning air outside his building. I felt all of it. The weight of 14 months. The particular sadness of something real that had also been, in the way that mattered most, insufficient. I let myself feel it completely. I didn't rush past it or compress it into something more manageable. And underneath it, steady and clean and entirely mine. The feeling of being exactly who I was. He texted 3 times that day. Twice the following day. Then a longer message, thoughtful, specific, the kind that showed he had understood more than I'd realized. I read it carefully. I appreciated the honesty in it. I didn't respond. Some doors you closed not out of anger, but out of knowledge. Not because the person on the other side is a villain. Daniel wasn't. He was a man who had made a small, telling choice and discovered too late what it had revealed, what it had cost. He introduced me as a friend. I paid my bill and left. And I have never once, not for a single moment, questioned whether I was right. If you've ever smiled through a moment that was quietly breaking you, you know exactly what this story is about. You know the weight of being reduced to a word that doesn't fit you? The exhaustion of making yourself smaller so someone else can feel more comfortable. Here's what I want you to take from this. The moment you decide you're only going to accept what you're actually worth, everything changes. Not loudly, not dramatically, just clearly. If this story hit something real in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you want to be here every time we tell another story about people who chose themselves when it counted most, subscribe. This is Revenge Nightfall. And I'll see you in the next one.